My name's Leonard Kozianski. I'm an artist, a professional artist. I've been an artist my whole life. This is my studio. Welcome to my studio. This is where I paint my pictures every day. And I'd like to talk to you today about ideas and where we get our ideas and where they come from. And is it okay to borrow ideas from other artists? And I would say, well, not really. I think it's much better to just steal those ideas openly and shamelessly. And because artists have been doing that for centuries. And I was encouraged to do it by my teachers, and so I'm encouraging you to do it now. And so let's take a look at some examples of what I mean. And we're going to begin. I'm going to show you a painting that I just finished and show you where I stole my ideas to create this painting. And so let's begin. Here it is. This is called When Morning Comes. And it is a painting of the dawn sky. I run every morning, and so I experienced this. I saw the dawn sky coming up behind these houses, and so I wanted to do a painting of it. So in my studio, I did an imaginary reconstruction of what I saw. But in the process of doing that, I also was incorporating and maybe stealing ideas from other artists along the way. Well, in this composition, it's oil on canvas. It's 26 inches high by 42 inches wide. I'm contrasting the sky against the foreground, the bottom of the picture. So in the sky, we have the light sky with the reds and oranges with the black bare branches in front. Down below, it's just the opposite. We have the dark foreground, the dark bottom of the picture that's punctuated by little light areas. So it's the top light punctuated by darks, the bottom dark punctuated by lights. And I'm having that contrast is the basis of my composition. And that sky, that reddish sky, it's something that we see often in the morning, in the wintertime, because the tilt of the earth makes those dawn skies seem to last a lot longer. It's also sort of a classic artist's subject. And so I'm incorporating that into my picture. Well, where did I get that idea from? When I was a student, I was also a museum guard across the street at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And one of their masterpieces was this painting by Frederick Church called Twilight in the Wilderness. It's a Hudson River painting from the mid-19th century. Now notice that red sky, that dawn sky, or maybe it's evening sky. But the thing is, this is a very realistic, or an attempt to be a very realistic representation of this dramatic moment in nature. But I was stealing this idea directly from him as I was doing my painting. And, because it was a beautiful painting, it's something I've seen. I spent hours in front of this painting. Because I was a guard for several years, I spent a lot of time in front of this painting. So it's sort of like part of the catalog of my art memories that I draw from as I do my own artwork. And so, rather than necessarily borrowing an idea, I'm just kind of stealing it directly from a famous artist, a famous painting. Now, are there other examples of artists who have done this? Well, there are. And this is an engraving of a drawing by Raphael. It's a classical scene. These are classical gods. I think this is like classic river gods. Okay, and so they're nude, they're out in nature, but notice their poses. Look at the poses, especially the woman's pose over there on the left. Notice how she has her arm holding her chin. When Edward Manet wanted to paint a picture, he used this composition. He used exactly the same composition. But he said it in contemporary terms, and a contemporary scene. And so when he exhibited this painting, this was one of the very first Impressionist paintings ever. And it was caused a scandal. People were outraged. And he said, well, why are they outraged? I'm just copying a composition by Raphael, classical painting composition. But notice that there's not a nude woman, there's a naked woman. And she's there with men who are clothed. She's a contemporary woman without her clothes on. And this was scandalous. Now, at the time, there were paintings of nude women, but they were always Greek and Roman goddesses. Venus or Athena or water nymphs, but something from Greek or Roman mythology. So having a contemporary woman just sitting out on the grass without her clothes on was scandalous. No matter how much Manet was relying on this classical composition from Raphael. But here he is, he's stealing his composition. And he's creating this sort of classic composition, but updating it into contemporary terms. And so, is he borrowing or is he stealing his ideas openly? Well, let's take a look at another painting, one that I have used in my own artwork. This is a painting by Vincent van Gogh, and it's called Starry Night, Rhone River. And Van Gogh is painting this scene of the Rhone River at night, and notice how he's reflecting light, the city lights, into the water, into that dark blue water. Okay, well, at the time, Van Gogh was painting outdoors. Impressionist painters painted outdoors. And the reason they did that was because for the first time, you had oil paint in tubes. And so they could take their oil paints outside and paint directly from nature. Previous to this, if an artist wanted to paint a landscape, they would do drawings outdoors, and then they'd take those drawings indoors and paint the landscape in the studio. Because color was created by pharmacists or colormans in these pots that they would take into their studios, they couldn't carry them outside. But here you have artists, here you have people making lead tubes of oil paint that they could take outside and paint directly from nature. And Impressionist painters did that. They painted these very truthful paintings directly from nature, the whole thing outdoors. So here we have Van Gogh painting outdoors at night. And he has no lights. There's no batteries, or, this is before electricity, before the electric light. And so what did he do? He took candles and put them in the brim of his hat so that he could have light to paint by at night of the Rhone River with lights reflected in the water. Well, people walking by thought he was a total nut job. They yelled at him. They threw rocks at him. They thought, what kind of an idiot is that sitting there with candles in his hat? And yet this painting is one of the great early modern masterpieces. Oh, here's an example. Here's a picture. Here's a photograph of the Rhone River at night today. And we can see those lights reflected in the water. This is what Van Gogh was painting. I'm reflecting light in the water also. And I'm doing it in a way that's very similar to the way Van Gogh did. So am I stealing his idea? Am I taking his ideas? Well, maybe, because, I'm aware of that picture. I loved his artwork. And so, his paintings sort of form that catalog of images in my own mind. So when I'm doing my painting, of course I remember that Van Gogh and how he painted his lights reflected in the water, and they have an influence on me. Am I stealing the idea? Well, maybe. I'm certainly borrowing pretty heavily from Van Gogh as I reflect those lights, those city lights, into the water in my painting. And, and notice I have runners there too, and this is a photograph, a series of photographs by the photographer Edward Maybridge. And when artists in the past, when they would paint runners or horses running, they would do it very expressively, but it wasn't very scientifically accurate. So Maybridge set up this series of cameras so that he could capture exactly the motion of people running or horses running, so he could see exactly what those poses were like. And this created a new standard for artists. When I do my painting of runners, I am aware of Maybridge. I've seen his photographs. I often refer to his photographs for how runners look when they're running. And we have lots of photographs now of runners running, people on bicycles, people riding horses, and those become a standard. But Maybridge created that standard in the late 19th century. And so I have to acknowledge that standard. Am I stealing his idea, or is that idea being thrust on me from the culture outside? Is it something that I have to acknowledge because it's the new reality in the 21st century? Well, here's another artist. This artist is Roger Brown. And I love Roger Brown paintings. I always loved his art when I was in school, in art school. And then as a professional artist, he showed with the Phyllis Kind Gallery. He's a Chicago artist, showed with the Phyllis Kind Gallery in New York and Chicago. And when I began my career, my professional career, I showed with the Phyllis Kind Gallery too. And so I showed with Roger. I got to meet him, and I admired his work. And, in this painting by Roger Brown, you can see that he has people silhouetted, dark silhouettes of people in front of these windows. And so we can see this activity going on inside the building. And contrasted with that are the people outside. We can see them in silhouette as well. And some of them, they're pointing up or they're walking down the street. But there's a contrast between what's going on outside the building and what's going on inside the building. And notice how the people are all very similar, and yet they're all a little bit different. Notice that the two buildings side by side are almost identical, but they're also a little bit different. Look at the top of those buildings. There's a little bit of a difference there. And so he's making a social comment about how we're all kind of the same and yet we're all a little bit different. He's also contrasting what goes on inside the buildings versus what goes on outside the buildings. And he's contrasting civilization, architecture versus clouds and nature up above. But his idea of having dark silhouettes against a light background is an idea that I steal directly from. And here, this is my painting, and you can see I'm stealing from Roger pretty directly here, where I have these dark silhouettes against the light background, and people are doing different things inside the houses. Now, over on the left, there's someone who's drinking coffee, and another person doing yoga, and then in the center of the picture, up above, there's someone who looks like they're making a bed, and then over on the right, up above, someone looking out the window, and then below him, there's a dog in the window barking. And so I'm taking that idea directly, and I'm also contrasting what goes on inside the houses versus what goes on outside with the runners. So I'm not just borrowing, I'm kind of borrowing quite a bit to the point where you'd say, well, Leonard, you're stealing his idea. And I'm saying, yes, but I'm incorporating it into my own artwork, my own life, my own imagery. And since, Roger painted his picture in the late 1960s, and this is the 21st century, I can't do it exactly the way he did it. I have to be different because I'm a different person in a different location, in a different time. And so I think it's perfectly fine for us to take ideas from other artists and incorporate them into our own artwork. The world does not need another mediocre painting. There are tons of mediocre paintings. You have a duty as an artist to make your artwork as unusual and as interesting as you possibly can, because other people are going to live with that idea. They're going to live with that painting. They're going to live with that image, and that should enrich their lives by its presence. So you need to make your painting as interesting as you can possibly make it to enrich the lives of the people who are going to live with that picture, with that object. And, so here's my painting, the finished painting. One morning comes and, I'm borrowing pretty heavily, or maybe you might say stealing pretty heavily from a Hudson River painter, Roger Brown, incorporating Edward Maybridge's ideas of the runner. But, we've seen that, Manet, he stole his composition directly from Raphael. So stealing seems to be okay. In fact, artists have been doing it for centuries. And in my painting, notice that in the lower left, there's a fisherman. And where did I get that idea from? Well, when I was a student at the Cleveland Institute of Art, I also copied paintings from the Cleveland Museum. And here is a painting by Eastman Johnson that I copied. It's a small painting, but I copied it. And so it is part of my educational experience. It sort of forms that catalog of images in my mind. So when I'm doing my painting, I incorporated that idea of the fisherman into my image. And here you can see the fisherman on the bank. Though in my painting, the fisherman is backlit. And so there's just sort of this orange lighted outline around the outside. So it's very different because it's a different time of day. In the Eastman Johnson, it's the sun's right up above. It's, full daylight. Here, this is dawn. And so the lighting is different, but it still has that same feeling to it. Am I stealing? Well, yeah, maybe. So where did I get the idea that it was okay to steal ideas? Well, I had a very famous teacher by the name of Wayne Thiebaud. And he told us, he said, don't just borrow ideas from other artists, steal them openly, unashamedly. He said, I do. And Wayne Thiebaud's paintings sell for millions of dollars. And so let's look at an example of Wayne Thiebaud stealing an idea from another artist. Well, here's a painting, a watercolor painting by Albrecht Dürer from the Renaissance, done in 1505, of a rabbit, a single rabbit against a white background with a little bit of a shadow over on the right. So when Wayne Thiebaud wanted to do a painting of a rabbit, well, he stole Dürer's idea, a single rabbit against a white background with a little bit of a shadow over on the right. So he's taking his composition, but he's incorporating it into his own style, his own ideas, because this painting was done in 1966. Wayne Thiebaud is taking Dürer's idea and redoing it in his own time and in his own style. So he's actually stealing an idea, but then he encouraged us to do the same thing. And so this idea of stealing ideas from other artists is a time-honored tradition. We're not plagiarizing. Plagiarism is a literary idea where you're copying another person word for word. We're not doing that. We're taking ideas. You can't copyright a style. Okay, the styles, techniques, compositions, those are ours to take and use in our own artwork. By doing so, it makes our artwork more interesting and more exciting. And as I said, we need to make our paintings as interesting as possible because the world does not need another mediocre painting. So here's my picture. When morning comes, a contrast between the top and the bottom, between what's going on inside the houses versus what's going on outside the houses, and with the dawn sky. And at the same time that I'm doing this, and I'm making this imaginary recreation of an experience that I had, I'm stealing ideas from other artists to help me make a more interesting painting of my own, and hopefully I have. But I'm stealing from Frederick Church and Eastman Johnson and Roger Brown and Vincent van Gogh, and that's what they're there for. And we should not be afraid to steal their ideas if they can help us make our paintings more interesting in the process. Well, thank you for watching this video and letting me talk to you about where our ideas come from and how it's okay to steal if they help make our pictures better in the process.
If you like this video, be sure to subscribe, like, and share.
And don't forget to ring the bell.